Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Jaden. I am a King James Bible believing teacher based in New York City. And today's video is going to be more of a casual talk. So it's not going to be anything too crazy, but it's something that I want to give you for you to think about. Now, so far we are almost halfway through the dispensationalism series. Pray that everybody's getting a blessing from it. There's going to be some crazy amounts of information that you're going to start seeing that I'm expanding on even more as we get later in the series. So I just pray that everyone's getting a blessing out of that. Series is not going to end until about April. And then after that, I have 2 more extras videos on covenant theology and hyper dispensationalism that are going to finish out that playlist. So what is this video going to be on? Well, this video is going to be on the falling away of Second Thessalonians chapter 2. So let's actually look at that in Second Thessalonians chapter 2. Now, this is a famous passage that is used by people who can't read to say that you are going to be in the tribulation. You're going to see the Antichrist. Now, I know it reads that way, but I personally, from the study that I did on this topic, I do not believe that the church is going to see the man of sin. And the reason I don't believe that is because the man of sin doesn't show up until Revelation chapter 6. And so if this revealing of the Antichrist is at the end of the church age, just before the rapture, that would mean that this revelation is a secret revealing and not a public revealing, because the public revealing happens in the book of Revelation. And in that part of the book, the rapture has already taken place. So for a numerous amount of reasons, I don't think that this revelation of the Antichrist here is talking about that. However, we do know that before that day, the rapture, this is talking about day of Christ, the rapture here can come. It says in verse 3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. So the interesting detail here is then, what exactly is the falling away? Okay. So the term falling away is the phrase that the word apostasy is defined as. An apostasy is when somebody believes in something and they fall away from that position. So for example, you're going to see in the upcoming videos when I go extremely in depth on salvation and the tribulation period, that if a man, according to Hebrews 6, tastes the powers of the world to come and then he falls away, he apostatizes, he can't get saved again. It's according to Hebrews. Now, here, that's not talking about that, though. This is a Pauline epistle. This is a Pauline passage. This is talking about, don't be worried about missing the rapture, people of Thessalonica, because that day is not going to come until there's a falling away first. So the falling away here is obviously an apostasy. But what apostasy is it? What type of apostasy is it? Well, the traditional interpretation of this falling away is based on Ruckman's literature. So in Ruckman's literature, he says that the church age in the book of Revelation, chapter 2 and 3, are spiritual prophecies about what will take place in the church, and that you can bracket each of the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, and those churches are going to match different time periods in church history. So, for example, he says that the Philadelphia church, the church that kept God's word in chapter 3 of Revelation, that church matches the Reformation church. And that was the one who kept God's word. And it was in that period in the church age where we had the King James Bible printed. Now, I'm not going to sit here and deny Ruckman's spiritual application, but the unfortunate reality is that many of the proofs he uses in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 to make those assertions are simply not there. In Revelation chapter 2, it says that ye shall have tribulation 10 days. And he interprets that as a reference to the 10 Roman persecutions that happened in the beginning of the church age. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong for him to make those interpretations, but if the devil accused us of being private interpreters, would he be wrong? I don't think so, right? Now, I'm not going to give Ruckman too much of a hard time because the layout that he has, it's still true. The church age, the way he spiritually applies it to prophecy in regards to history, the applications are there. But those prophecies in the church in the book of Revelation aren't exactly talking about that, right? There's always a doctrinal reference. Now, we'll not be going over that doctrinal reference. But the reason I'm saying that is because what they do is that Ruckman has it that the Laodicean church age begins with the Westcott and Hort text being printed, and then when the Westcott and Hort text was printed, then that's basically when God dropped His blessing on everything, and then you saw the rapid decline of society. Right now, I'm not that's partially true. When the New Age Bibles were printed, you saw a rapid, extremely fast decay. You saw increased ecumenicism going back to Rome. You saw world wars like we've never seen in history, not even in the Old Testament. We saw destructions and bombings and terrorist attacks. We saw stuff that was unparalleled, right? So I'm not going to deny that Ruckman's uh, thoughts on the fact that the new Bibles contributed to much of the curse that's on humanity. I'm not going to deny that. But something you need to think about is I want you to consider another perspective. The thing is that it says here that let no man deceive you, for that day shall not come except there being a falling away first. Now, the apostasy in his interpretation is that everybody was staying faithful to the King James Bible, and then after the revivals, when the new ones came out, everyone fell away from the standing position of the King James Bible. The problem I have with this interpretation, although I'm not gonna disannul it completely, is that if you look in church history, while the real Christians were planting these churches all around the world and spreading Christianity, for the most part, for the most part, um, those Christians were always in the minority. You see, the Catholic Church and all of the different forms that it took in history, and then when Islam showed up, they were always the majority. So you say, well, so what am I getting at? Well, what I'm getting at is that if you just say, well, the New Age Bibles are the reason for the apostasy, that doesn't exactly work, because not like 10 minutes later, speaking as a sarcastically, not 10 minutes after Jesus left, or rather, not 10 minutes after Paul left, you had all these different churches that were going apostate. And then even John, in the end of his epistle, First John, Second Thought, Third John, although those books are primarily prophecy, in his books, he even says that in his day, you had all these false people coming up in the world, antichrists. So the second Paul died, the church just started to get corrupted, and then you had that one line of the Christians who were actually doing the correct thing. The rest of them were messing around with the church fathers. They were corrupted with Origen and Gnosticism and wicked Greek religion and all that kind of stuff, right? So would that have been the falling away? You see what I mean? Now, if you're not understanding the point that I'm getting at, I want you to understand something, that if the falling away is simply the corruption of the Bible, you have to make that argument for every period of the church, because every period of the church has Bible corruptions. You see that? You see, when the scriptures were written down by the apostles and those guys, and then the false Gnostics started trying to corrupt the scriptures, like, Aristotle and Plato, Origen, right? Symmachus, Theodosian, all these guys were rewriting the Bible. They created the fake Septuagint, the Hexapla. The Greek philosopher didn't like it. They were already in the business of corrupting the biblical text that God was going to bring the King James Bible about. So if Ruckman's interpretation is that the falling away was caused because everyone rejected the King James Bible in favor of the new printed ones, while you can make that application, is that really what the falling away of 2 Thessalonians 2 is talking about? In every period in history, you had people falling away from the faith, from the correct biblical manuscripts, the correct biblical text, and then getting some corrupt text. In fact, if you study Russian history with Constantine Simonides, that whole history of their Bible, of the Elizabethan Bible and the Sinaiticus, that whole thing is filled with stories of corruption and espionage and all that stuff. You could pick up David Daniel's book about that, right? So everywhere in the world, at every point in history, in every language, you had some apostasy of that group of people falling away from the Bible that they used, but you didn't see the massive curse that you saw when Westcott and Hort showed up, right? So is that really what that's talking about? The 2 Thessalonians chapter 2? Is it really just talking about the falling away of just Well, now we have New Age Bibles, so now we're messed up, right? I mean, think about it this way: we've had hundreds of false denominations. Now they weren't called that back then. They weren't called denominations. They were called sects or groups or whatever you want to call them, right? A lot of the same heresies that were around 1500 years ago are still around today. And those people are doing the same exact thing to prove their heresy the same way they were doing it back then. Let me give you an example. There are people who say, I'm Jesus only. I only follow Jesus. That's not a new heresy. That's an old heresy that started in the 2nd century. They're called Ebionites. These are people trying to follow the Jesus of the kingdom, bringing in the kingdom, but they didn't move along with the program. Jesus is not in the kingdom program right now. Right now, he's dealing with the church age program. So these guys are called Ebionites, and they say that you should be saved. You got to keep the Sermon on the Mount, and you got to follow the teachings of Jesus. Are you sure? Right? Is that biblical? Well, there are people today that say that. They call themselves red letter only. They say, I only read Jesus. They're like reverse hyper dispensationalists. Instead of only reading Paul, they only read the Gospels. Yeah, that's stupid. That's so stupid. Right? But that's not a new heresy. Now, you know what these people do to get that interpretation? They just throw away half the Bible and only read the part they want to read. That's no different than the people back then. They just pretend like Paul didn't write any letters, and then they only read Jesus. Well, these faker Jesus only followers are just 3rd degree budget Judaizers. That's all they are. Because back then, that's all they were. There's fake Jews. Nowadays, they're 7-day Adventist. They want to keep the commandments. They want to roll up to their church on Saturdays, which is forbidden, by the way. Exodus 35, I think it is, says that you can't even kindle a fire on the Sabbath. So these bungling idiots start talking to you about going to church on Saturday, this and that, and they're rolling up in a car, a Bugatti, right? So I'm not going to disannul Ruckman's interpretation completely, because it is true that the New Age Bibles brought in a decline and a curse and a growth in ecumenicism that was never seen before its time, even though you saw pockets of it before then. But I am not wholly convinced that the falling away is exactly talking about that. Now, this is just my opinion, okay? Although some of this I'm going to show you today is actually biblical doctrine. I have to go in and correct some stuff, okay? What do I think the falling away is first? Well, I think what you have is, I think that what you have with the Christian church is you have an exact repetition of the Jewish remnant, that the Christian remnant are repeating the same exact errors that the Jews were repeating in the days of Jeremiah and in the days when Jesus showed up. You say, well, what do I mean by that? Okay, so let's consider a couple things. Let's go to Galatians. Galatians 1. Galatians 1. Let's consider some things. In 2 Thessalonians, God says that he's going to send strong delusion that they might believe a lie, and that they all might be damned that believe not in the truth, right? Now, right now, we're at the end of the church. I believe that God has already sent a strong delusion. If you've dealt with any evangelism or just dealt with anybody, period, people are just so confused. Some people say, for example, you tell somebody, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And people will argue with you and say, well, did he really mean it when he said, I am the way? And it's like, well, he meant what he said, and he said what he meant, right? You understand? So people are just deluded. People are confused. A lot of people are just lost, and they don't understand the Bible at all. Or they're just playing dumb. So God is just letting them play dumb, right? It could be a lot of things. But like I said earlier, I'm not wholly convinced that the falling away is just the New Age Bibles, right? Now, why do you say that? Well, they contribute to it, definitely. There's a lot of people who read the New Age Bibles. This is going to sound like heresy, but listen for 2 minutes. There's a lot of people that read those new Bibles, and they clean up their lives and they live normal, but they have no power in their lives, and because they have a butter knife, they can't serve the Lord. So they only reached the point in their life where they had an experience, and then now they cleaned up some bad sin habits that they had, a couple of them. And what happens with these people is that they fall away very easily because they don't have the real word of God. Or if they don't fall away and they're zealous, the devil uses that and messes them up with some weird doctrine, right? And I've seen it, right? But you have to understand that that false deception, that's always been present, guys. It's always been present. There have always been corrupt Bibles. They may have not been mass printed the way they are now. They may not have been as accessible, but there has always been false Bibles, false denominations, false teachers, heretics. That's always been around. So you can make the argument that the mass production of these things contributed to ecumenicism. The rejection of the King James Bible brought in God's curse. You can make those arguments, but that's not the whole picture. You understand? You understand? Now, what am I slowly getting at? What I'm getting at is that if you have the King James Bible and you know it's the perfect unadulterated word of God, you know that God gave that book by inspiration. You don't use the book, you believe the book. Okay? Well, the passage says in 2 Thessalonians that there's going to come a falling away first. But who are the people falling away? They're the real believers. Not the people who had no root in them and then they fell away. That's not those people. These people that they pick up a modern age Bible, they clear up their life a little bit, and then they so-called serve the Lord, but then they fall away. That's not talking about that, because that's always happened. 2 Thessalonians 2 is talking about the church falling away in altogether. Now, if a person has a modern Bible, are they not saved? No, those people can get saved from a modern Bible, right? I'm not saying you can't get saved from a modern Bible. But there's something that's contributing to the body of Christ as a whole falling away. So let's look at some details. We're on Galatians, but let me just remind you that one of the problems with the Christian church in the Laodicean period is that they have too many goods. They are materialistic. Okay. The church of Laodicea, in the Revelation chapter 3, it says, and unto the church of the Laodiceans. The people of Laodicea made the church their own. Here, actually, let's take a look at that so you understand what I'm talking about. Go to Revelation chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3. You may not even know what I'm talking about. This is a detail you may have not noticed. Revelation chapter 3. I want you to notice very carefully. Look at verse 14. And unto the angel of the church of the Laodiceans. That's not what it says for the other church. Look at Revelation chapter 3, verse 7. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia. This is a local assembly in Philadelphia. But in verse 14, it says, of the church of the Laodiceans, not in Laodicea. Did you notice that? That's because these Laodiceans, they took the church and they made it their own and they kicked Jesus out. So then at the end, in verse 20, he says, I stand at the door and knock, if any man will hear my voice. The church of Laodicea, it's a local assembly of real Christians, but they threw Jesus out. They threw the real Jesus out, right? Now you might say, well, yeah, brother, that's exactly what Ruckman was talking about. Ruckman was saying that when the New Age Bibles came in, they have a false Jesus. Yeah, but that's always been the case. You've always had churches with a false manuscript, a false side of stuff. You've always had that in history. That's not just now. It's bigger now with the internet and with the printing press, but that's always been the case. You've always had people claiming to be Christians assembling together, and they have the wrong Jesus. That's always been the case. And Paul warned you about that in Second Corinthians 11. So while Ruckman makes this argument, and I'm not disannulling his argument completely, it's not the whole picture. Go to Galatians 1. Go to Galatians 1. So we're in the Laodicea period right now. The first character trait of the Laodicean period is materialism. So here's the first point, materialism. Is it bad to have material goods? No, it is not bad to have a lot of money. Money is not the evil. Paul makes it clear it's the love of money in this present world that makes people fall away. He says, for He said, for the love of money is the root of all evil, which some have coveted after. They have erred from the faith. These are people in the faith. They gain the love of money and they have erred from the faith. The faith is a specific term. That's the faith. That's the gospel. That's the mysteries. That's everything, right? So it's not just some general statement. So the first characteristic of this period in history is the love of money. People will do anything for money. Now, that was harder to do back then, but now all you have to do is just have the illusion you know any Bible, just make like a couple videos calling out a heretic, and then put a donation link, and people will send you money because Christians are stupid and don't know how to, don't have no discernment. And then they say to me, well, you can't, people can't talk like you talk and be in the spirit. What are you talking about, man? I know that Jesus didn't talk to normal people that way. He talked to the Pharisees that way. But some of these Christians are so full of themselves and they're so religious and stupid that you have to talk to them like you're talking to a Pharisee because they won't get it in their thick head that they're just like the Pharisees sometimes. They get offended. You can't even say the word stupid behind the pulpit because Christians are so soft. But if something is stupid, it's stupid. You should call a spade, man. You understand? Now, I don't like talking to people that way. But the internet is full of morons, right? These guys will send money to these ministries that have no idea about the Bible. They know nothing about the Bible, half these ministries. And they're giving them money, man. See? The love of money. And these guys, they know it. They get this preeminence. They like being followed. They like I have no interest in that. Right? Whoever's listening to my channel, they can listen. If they don't want to listen, they don't have to listen. I'm a nobody. But these guys online, they want to be a somebody. They want to be something. Right? And then you know what? They're like, well, I have a name on the internet. I'm serving the Lord. Everyone online sees me. And then the temptation comes in. Let me get some money so I can do it full time, quote unquote. The love of money is the root of all evil. All of the world's problems can be traced back to money, somewhere, one way or another. One way or another. Right? Covetousness, right? For the Bible says covetousness is idolatry in Colossians chapter 3, right? So you got to be careful. You might say, well, how is this relevant now, right? Well, I'm going to start to get to something. The next characteristic of the last days. So the first one is the love of money. The second characteristic is false teachers. Okay, false teachers. I want you to notice that in every apostasy Israel ever had, God credited their fall with the Levites, the priests, the teachers. They were the ones that made Israel fall away as a whole. In fact, the last book of the Bible, Malachi in the Old Testament, is directed to the priests. He said a priest should love to hear. Look, go to Malachi. Go to Malachi. I know I said Galatians, but God's kind of giving me a little road here. Go to Malachi, chapter 2 and verse 7 or verse 6. The law of truth was in his mouth, and iniquity was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and equity, and didn't turn away many from iniquity. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge. They should seek the law at his mouth, for he is the what? The messenger of the Lord of hosts. You understand that you are, this is obviously not talking to you. This is talking to the Levites. You understand that you are a spiritual priest. 1 Peter chapter 2. You understand that Bible teachers are God's messengers. God sends them to correct the sheep. So what do you do when all of the teachers are full of it? They're lost their minds. So then you go to Timothy. Go to First Timothy. Let's look at some traits here. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1. Now the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, speaketh expressly that in the latter times, okay, notice this. Notice this. The Spirit is not speaking vaguely, expressly, clearly, absolute. He's not giving you like a maybe. That in the latter times some shall depart from the faith. Why? Giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Doctrines of devils, you understand? Here, how about this one? Go to 2 Timothy. Go to 2 Timothy. Chapter 4, verse 3. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall heap to themselves teachers, having itching ears, and shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. Okay, you starting to notice where I'm going with this? The credit of the fall of Israel was their teachers. God dedicated 2 long prophets to this topic, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Those books are about the Israel and how stubborn and rebellious they were. But who he credit their fault for? The teachers, the pastors, the leaders. That does not mean that the people who are dumb sheep, who are just following some guy, that doesn't mean that they're absolved of the responsibility 100%, because it's your job to study. But God gave certain gifts to pastors and teachers. Those people know more than the sheep. And some of them, they like to pretend like, oh, well, I didn't know. But they pretend to be stupid, but they're not stupid. So now you have Israel, who goes into apostasy because their teachers are not faithful. Their teachers don't teach the truth. The priest stopped seeking after the law of God. They didn't care anymore. It's just starting to sound a little familiar. Now, I want you to understand something. The people of the first century, Orthodox Jews, they were just like us King James Bible believers. They had the right book. So you can't say, well, they had the wrong Bible and that's why they fell away. They rejected Jesus. They didn't have the wrong Bible. They had the full Tanakh. When they fell away, it had nothing to do with the modern Bible. They had the right Tanakh. They had the right doctrine. Well, most of them, except the Sadducees, they had the wrong doctrine, right? When Jesus showed up, they misquoted Micah 5:2, but they knew that Messiah, Moshiach, would be born in Bethlehem. They knew when he would show up. Even the wise men from the east, they knew when he would show up because of Daniel's prophecy, right? They knew that the Messiah would show up because of Daniel's 70 weeks. They knew all that. They were looking for it. They said to John the Baptist, who art thou? Art thou he that should come? Art thou that prophet? Talking about Deuteronomy 18, right? So the Jews were not stupid. They knew who Jesus was. They didn't know he was the Lord of glory. But a lot of them, they knew he was Messiah. They were just being hard-headed. They were stubborn. But they had the right doctrine. They had the right Bible. They were, quote unquote, following God and doing what they thought God wanted. They had their own teachers. But you know what's an interesting characteristic about these people? These people follow the Pharisees, and the Pharisees love to be called Rabboni. Seem a little familiar? These guys that are like, I'm an independent fundamentalist, King James, Bible-believing, dispensational, blah, 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 blah. And these people, half of them are heretics. Robert Bricker, complete stupid degenerate moron online, because that's what he is. He's a money-hungry scumbag. He's taking money from all these people who are there. They are dumb sheep. This guy is the literal single worst heretic on the block. We're at the point right now where a chapter so simple like Romans chapter 10 that now I have to actually go in and analyze this chapter to explain to people, no. If you call on the Lord for salvation, you're saved. These idiots say, well, you're trusting in a prayer. No, I'm not. I believe the gospel, and then I'm telling God I believe it, like Romans 10 says to. Now you have this moron, ex-Catholic for Christ, doing the same exact thing. Oh, well, if you pray the prayer, you're just praying to God and you're trusting in what you told him, but you're not believing and trusting in what he did for you. Yeah, you're a stupid idiot. He's a stupid idiot. That James Patel, whatever guy, that guy knows nothing about the Bible. He knows nothing about the Bible. Everything he knows, he got it from Ruckman, and then he threw away half of Ruckman's stuff and then pretend like he didn't get it from Ruckman. He's a stupid idiot. Now he's teaching all these confused Catholics. All these people are following him, and he's teaching what Robert Breaker teaches. That you just believe the gospel and that's it. You don't confess to God with your mouth. How did we get to this point? You understand? The doctrine they're teaching is called mental assent. It's the belief that you just believe it in your head. But they're saying, no, you have to believe it in your heart. How do you believe it in your heart if you have intellectual knowledge of it and you haven't acted on that faith? The way you act on that faith is because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. If you really believe it, it should come out of your mouth. But they're like Calvinists. They say, no, you get saved first and then you confess to prove it. That is a heresy. Now, why is it that thousands of people are watching these two idiots who know nothing about the Bible? They took some of Ruckman's works to make a following, and then they attack an obvious religion. He's ex-Catholic. He's attacking the Catholics, but he himself is a damnable heretic. And all these people are giving him money and following this guy. They're all following Robert Breaker, and they're just regurgitating the garbage that they're saying. They're not thinking about what they're reading. Now, some of these Christians, they're so naive, and they say, well, you can't talk like that, brother. You're just so rude. Yeah, it boils my blood. Because this is causing retreads. Souls are getting damned to hell because now you have these idiots going around saying, no, you don't have to confess to God for salvation. You just believe in your heart and that's it. What? You understand? Who could believe something so stupid? That is stupid. Even the Pentecostals have that doctrine right. The Pentecostals, the emotional people that everyone makes fun of them, and they have some funny stuff. Hala, shabala, blah, 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 untie my bow tie, right? But even they have Romans 10 right. So you have these professing independent fundamentalists, King James, Bible believing, dispensational, blah, blah, blah. And some of these guys are the worst heretics on the block. And they think because they're King James Bible believers that that means anything. Okay, cool. God showed you that it's his book. The Spirit bears witness to that. You had to go to Dr. Ruckman to boost your faith and then turn on him and slander him and make up all this garbage about how he was wrong about this doctrine and this doctrine that nobody ever debated about for like 2,000 years until these idiots showed up. Robert Breaker, his fake AI book, preaching faith in the blood, this peculiar gospel that nobody's ever preached until this idiot shows up, calling himself the next Martin Luther. You understand? Are you starting to see what I'm getting to? The apostasy is not coming from outside, guys. It's coming from within. People who are professing to be King James Bible believers. I don't care if you're a King James Bible believer. That doesn't mean you have the right doctrine. Right? So now you have the love of money. And the second thing is you have the teachers, the pastors. They are complete macabre joke, half these guys. Most of these guys are not, a lot of these guys are not even qualified to be in the ministry. They don't know anything about the Bible to be teaching you anything. Okay? And this is not about pride. I don't think I'm better than anybody. That's not what this is about. But I can just sit. I obsessively read the Bible. I can sit and listen to these guys, and I can my red spidey senses go off, and I hear it. And Christians have no discernment. They keep talking about discernment ministries. Spencer Smith, discernment ministry. What discernment ministry? How is he a discernment ministry? The guy's calling himself a dispensationalist. He's not a dispensationalist. He believes the garbage that Calvin believes. Salvation is the same in all dispensations. That's Calvinism. That originated with Calvinism. Spencer Smith is not a dispensationalist. So now he goes around and he makes these esoteric videos, discernment ministries, the spiritual wickedness in high places, talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Really, guys? Is looking at how evil Jeffrey Epstein any type of discernment? How is that discernment ministry? What discernment? What edification is that? Okay, so Jeffrey Epstein was a sexual evil guy. The government releases the Epstein files, and what do we find out? He was a sexual evil guy. What discernment, guys? So now they're paying this guy all this money to have a podcast studio to talk about nothing. He has a series talking about the Knights of the Templar. The Knights of the Templar were pagan Baal worshippers, this and that. Okay, I needed to pay someone to find that out. And people throw money at it. And his channel is called Doctrine Matters. That's all he talks about. Doctrine Matters. But he himself is confused. Are you starting to see what I'm getting at? Okay. You have all these guys online. All of them. They're internet personalities. Who are these people behind the screen? Who are these people behind all of that? Who are their elders? You have no idea. You have no idea. I have a pastor. I have a ministry. I'm accountable to brethren in person. Who are these people? You have no idea. And they're independent, fundamentalist, Baptist, King James, Bible believing, dispensational, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff. Pre-millennial, good, godly, fundamental. Yeah, who cares? And that's why all these men hate Ruckman, because Ruckman went the hardest after the so-called conservative fundamentalists, because they're the worst devils. It's not the lost liberals that are the worst ones. It's the conservative fundamentalist Baptists. They are the worst devils. You understand? Go to Galatians chapter 1. I'm starting to make a point now. Here. What is the falling away? I do believe the modern Bibles contributed to it. However, I really don't think that the modern Bibles is all of it, because we Bible believers, we have mostly the right doctrine. We have the right Bible, but there's something I want you to notice about the fundamentalist King James Bible believers. They are cold. That's the first problem. Now, I will fight you on doctrine. To the end. However, I'm only nasty online because I got these guys watching me. I don't know who's watching me. And some of these guys, they need to wake up. Right? Now, for the people that are actually learning, they know who it's intended for, so they don't get offended by it. Right? But if you get offended by the plain talking, maybe you're the person that I'm directing that to. Okay? Right? But in real life, I'm not like that with people. Because in real life, you got to learn how to deal with people. You got to learn how to get to people's level, help them understand. Okay? There's a time and a place. Okay? So I want you to understand something with this falling away. Is the falling away just because of the modern Bibles? We got the love of money. And because of the love of money, we have all these false teachers who are trying to make a name for themselves, preeminence, and they're taking your wallet to do it, dude. Right? Half these guys, they are not worthy of their wages. Galatians chapter 1. In the book of Galatians, this is a commonly misinterpreted book. Dr. Ruckman had this book entirely wrong. Go to Galatians chapter 5. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Galatians chapter 5, verse 4. Christ is become of no effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, ye are fallen from grace. Now, I'm not disrespecting Dr. Ruckman, but he had this whole book wrong. He teaches that the idea is that this is somebody who's coming up to getting saved by grace through faith, and then they fall away and they don't get saved because they're trusting in the works of the law to save them. That is incorrect. First of all, the book of Galatians is not addressed to any lost person. It's addressed to saved people. Okay, let's go through this book. Galatians chapter 1 and verse 1. Paul, an apostle, not of men, neither by man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead. And all the brethren, see that? Which are with me unto the churches of Galatia, not lost people. In Rome, it said to them that be at Rome. So it could be Christians and Gentiles. This is not talking to Gentiles. Verse 4, who gave himself for our sins, that he might deliver us. Paul's including himself with this group of people that he's sending the letter to. Verse 6, I marvel that ye, the brethren at Galatia, are so soon removed from him which called you into the grace of Christ unto another gospel. He's not talking to a lost person preaching a false gospel. He's talking about a saved person who's now fallen away from the real thing and is preaching something else. Guys, that's why he says it in verse 9, as we said before. So I say again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that ye have received, let him be accursed. He's talking to saved people. He's not talking to a lost person here. Go to Galatians chapter 2. So then what's the context? Verse 3, but neither Titus, who was with me being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. And because of, false brethren who came in privily to spy out our liberty, which we might have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage. He's talking to saved people, saying that false brethren came in, trying to bring us under bondage, according to what? The law. The law is bondage. These false brethren are trying to come in and destroy their liberty in Christ. Okay. Now watch it. Verse 9. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given unto me, they gave to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen, and they unto the circumcision. Now, what is it that Paul got mad at Peter for? Well, Peter was living with the Jews, with the Gentiles, but then when he would go to the Jews, he didn't want to be seen as betraying them. So he was compelling the Gentiles to be like them. Verse 14, but when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, if thou being a Jew livest after the manner of Gentiles and not as do as the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? You understand what he's saying? So now watch it. Verse 18, for if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I, through the law, am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. He said, which I now live in the flesh. I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Watch it. I do not frustrate the grace of God. For if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. Now, you can make the application here that if someone is trying to get saved by the law, then Jesus died for no reason. You can make that application, but that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about somebody who's trying to be brought back into bondage. And this person, Paul is saying here, I'm crucified with Christ. He's saying that if my righteousness is coming from the law, then Christ died for me for no reason. He's not saying that if we're trying to get saved by the law, then Christ died for no reason. That's not what's going on here. Let's keep reading. I'm going to put these pieces together for you in a minute. Okay. Go to Galatians chapter 4. Galatians chapter 4. He's talking to saved people. This whole chapter, he's talking to saved people. Okay. Go to Galatians chapter 4 and verse 5. To redeem them that were under the law, that we, Christians, might receive the adoptions of sons. Watch it. And because ye are sons, that's not a lost person. God had sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts. Talking about saved people, crying, Abba, Father. Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son. And if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. He's talking to saved people. You know why that's important? Because look at the context now. Verse 8. Howbeit then, when ye knew not God, ye did service unto them which by nature are no gods. But now, talking to saved people, after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements whereunto ye desire to be in bondage? He's saying you guys started, you were known of God, so why did you turn right back around and then put yourself back under bondage of the law? You want to know what that is? Well, brother, I know the New Testament says that you tithe according to your heart. I know the New Testament says that you're supposed to give according to the grace that God's purposed in you and all that. But I really still think you should tithe 10%. I know tithing is technically only in the Old Testament, and I know, if they were able to tithe 10% under the law, you should you should be able to tithe more under grace. But technically, you should still tithe 10%. But you don't have to though. It's according to your heart, and that you see that? Yeah, it's religion. The Bible's so clear. It's by grace. You give by grace. You don't give 10% mandatory. If you set it in your heart to always give 10% because that's what God has purposed in you, that's different. But that's not what's going on here. These fundamentalists, if you really, really, really want to give, you could give according to your heart. But if you're really right with God, you give 10%. We don't have to, though. Yeah, that's not from God. That's not from God. 2 Corinthians is so clear. You know what that is? That's people who are started in grace, and now they're trying to go back under the law and set convictions on stuff that God did not tell you to do in the New Testament. And you say, well, but it's good for you. Yeah, it is good for you. The law has a lot of good stuff for you. I'm not saying don't live holy. See, you see what people are going to do. They're going to say, so you're saying you can do whatever I want? No. Because Paul addresses that in chapter 5, which we'll get to that. Right? So now look in verse 10, 4:10. Ye observe days, months, times, and years. You see that? These goofballs are observing days, months, times, and years. Yeah, that's Jewish. We don't do that. Are you right with God now? Well, if you're really right with God, brother, I really think you're gonna have to come out to that fellowship meeting. If you don't come with us, I don't really think you're right with God, brother. I don't think you really been one of us. You know what? Matter of fact, if you're not a Baptist, if you don't have Baptist in your church, right, brother, I don't really think I can come to your church and talk with you because you don't have Baptist in your church name. Yeah, that's stupid. That's what this is talking about. So then he says, verse 11, I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain. Verse 13, but know ye how through the infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you at the first. See that? So then he says in verse 19, my little children, whom I travail in birth again until Christ be formed in you. Are you starting to see what's going on over here? These are not lost people trying to get saved by grace through faith, and then they fall away and choose to get saved by their good works. These are saved people who started in the spirit, and then they went back trying to go and use the law to perfect themselves, thinking that God will be okay with it. Go to Galatians chapter 3, verse 1. O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you that ye should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ had been evidently set forth, crucified among you? This only would I learn of you. Received, look, Galatians, received, past tense, received ye the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? He's saying, did you guys get the Holy Spirit because of the law or because you heard? Are ye so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, being born again? Are ye now made perfect by the flesh? You see that? He's saying you guys started off right. You started off born again. You started off in grace, growing in grace. Are you not perfect by doing works of the flesh? Doing religious stuff that makes it look like God's going to be okay with that? Well, brother, you know, I just don't. If a woman doesn't wear a skirt down to the bottom of her ankles, I really just don't see how she can be right with God. Yeah, if you don't dress this way when you come to my church, I just can't have you in the church, brother. I don't think you can do that. Yeah, I don't think you can do that. Have you seen some of these women? They call other Christians Jezebel because the woman wears a skirt below her knees. These stupid so-called conservative right-wing fundamentalist men want trad wives. They want these old school women who are going to bake and cook for them at home, and these men don't want to be the men that deserve those kind of women. Well, my wife, she wears no makeup and she gets I just don't see how a woman could be right with God because she goes to the salon and gets her nails done. I just don't see how she could be right with God if she does that. You see that? Is that from God? Now there are things I believe you shouldn't do. See? What people are going to do is they're going to say, so you're saying that I could just live however I want? Nobody's saying that. Nobody is saying that. Right? But Paul is trying to show you something here. Are you made perfect because you start adding all these things to your flesh to make yourself look like you're doing the right thing? I'm a King James Bible believer. I wear a suit and tie. I'm a Bible believing King James fundamentalist, dispensational, independent, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And some of these guys have the worst family relationships. They have the worst marriages. Some of these guys are professional Christian bums. They will not work a job. But they're like, look, I'm doing all this for the Lord. I'm doing this and that. And they're not doing that. You understand? They have tacked on all this stuff onto their flesh and they think they're right with God because of all this religion. Okay? I'm not talking about stuff that you should stop doing because it's bad for you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the characteristics and the habits of the pastors and teachers in the fundamentalist Baptist community that think that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you can't be right with God. That's not New Testament doctrine. And then they weary out their sheep with this. And people feel like they have to give money or they're not really right with God. I think you should give money to support your local church. According to grace. Yeah, but in the Old Testament, tithing, it's a pretty good metric. Yeah, that's religion. That's not from God. Galatians chapter 5. Now, with that context in mind, read it in verse 1. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage, which is the law. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. That's some of these guys. That's the mentality. Well, in the Old Testament, they got circumcised. So, I mean, if God asked them to do it, that means he must have approved of it. So what's the big deal if we do it? I think we can still do it, right? I mean, if God ordered in the Old Testament, it's not technically a big issue. If we do it in the New Testament, I mean, we should get circumcised, right? Yeah, where do you read that in the New Testament? Nowhere. So it says in verse 3, for I testify to every man that is circumcised that he is a debtor to do the whole law. So you want to go in the law of Moses and start taking all these verses and applying them to you, saying that if somebody else doesn't do what you're doing, now they're not right with God. If it's your personal conviction to give 10%, and you really feel like, Lord, I'm gonna make that sacrifice for you, I'm gonna do that, then that's the grace he's given to you. But that's not a mandate. That's not a mandate. Okay. Verse 4, Christ is become no effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, ye are fallen from grace. This is not to a lost person. Because in verse 5, he says, for we, through the Spirit, wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. Verse 7, ye, Christians, did run well. Who did hinder you that ye should not obey the truth? You understand? What happens is that when a person gets saved, they get so convicted of sin, they start removing this out of their life. And then they start adding up all these list of commandments, and they're tempted to add these commandments because they don't want to make God mad. Now, again, I'm not talking about stuff that you should not be doing. You should not be listening to heavy death metal as a Christian. That's not spiritual music. But there's some music, for example, if you're a Jamaican from that country, the only reference you have for music is reggae. Now, if you're out here in America or Europe and you hear a Christian Jamaican, there are real Christian Jamaicans over there, and the only music they have over there is reggae. Is that guy not right with God because he makes worship music with the music of his people? That's the only thing he has over there? Is he not right with God now? Yeah, the Americans would say yes. He's not right with God. He should only sing spiritual hymns. I love spiritual hymns. I think people should go back to those. But does the Jamaican guy in that country know that? He doesn't have that. He just has a little bummed down house church that he built. Right? Is he less right with God now? Because he plays a little guitar tune on his acoustic and sings about Jesus in the music of his country. That's the only music he has over there that he knows. It's not rap music. Now, some people will say, well, brother, I just don't think you should do that. Well, yeah, that's a Romans 14 issue. But listening to heavy death metal is not a Romans 14 issue. Why are you listening to heavy death metal? Heavy death metal was literally created, and it's used for demonic worship. Right? It's not the same. There's a balance. There's a balance. Now, when I got saved, I used to listen to heavy death metal. Was I not right with God in the beginning? I didn't know it was bad until I started reading the Bible a lot, and I was like, yo, this is kind of bad. I don't think I should listen to this. Right? I don't think you should listen to that junk. But you know why you shouldn't listen to that junk? Because it's 1 Thessalonians 5:22. Abstain from all appearance of evil. That's why you shouldn't listen to it. Right? There's some Jews that they're saved Jews, and their style of music uses that old Middle Eastern hymn sound. Are they not right with God because they make music worshiping Jesus using that's their culture from that country? That's all they know over there? The fundamentalists would say yes, they're not right with God because they're stupid. So what Paul was saying, he said, ye didn't run well. Verse 7, who did hinder you that you should not obey the truth? You understand? He says in verse 13, for brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only, okay, now watch it. Watch it. So now, you have this liberty in Christ. Can you just do whatever you want? No, Paul says it, verse 13. You have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh. So Paul just went like 5 chapters scolding the Galatians for trying to put themselves under the law. But now he's saying you do have the liberty, but don't use it to do evil. So then he says in verse 17, for the flesh lusting against the spirit and the spirit against the flesh. Verse 19, the work of the flesh are these. You understand? For chapter 6 and verse 2, bear another one's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. If any man think himself to be something when he is nothing, let him be deceiveth himself. Next chapter, he says in verse 12, as many as desire to make a fair show in the flesh, they constrain you to be circumcised, only lest they should suffer the persecution for the cross of Christ. So these legalistic Pharisees, I'm not talking about, because some people, they say, oh, well, you're being too legalistic, brother. You're telling me I can't have alcohol. No, you shouldn't be drinking alcohol. It's forbidden. That's not what I'm talking about. You should not be smoking cocaine or snorting all that stuff or smoking. You should not be doing any of that. That's not what this is talking about. But you got these guys that they want to have you live the way that they live and do all these standards and convictions the way that they have it. And say, well, if you don't do it like I'm doing it, you're not right with God. I'm talking actual legalism. At my church, some of the women show up in sweaters. Some churches, if you wear jeans, they throw you out. That's not from God. Is a woman not right with God because she shows up to church in a sweater? When it's cold, we just had a snow front, a cold front, I mean. It was negative 35 degrees. Is the woman not right with God because she shows up to church in a sweater? No. She has to show up with a long skirt down to her ankles or she's not right with God. Yeah, you're an idiot. So I want you to notice something. Why am I bringing all this up from Galatians? Because the Christian King James Bible-believing fundamentalist remnant are doing the same exact thing that the Jews were doing in the first century. They had the right book. They had the right religion. They had the right God. They had the right zeal. They had everything. But they thought that by adding all these things, that God was going to be pleased with that. And you know what Israel ended up doing? Israel ended up cutting themselves off. Every time they were rejecting Christ, they were grafted into God and they were saw-blaying themselves off and cutting themselves off from God. Now the Christians are spiritually doing the same thing. So now people have fallen because of money. They've heaped themselves teachers having itching ears. And they set all these so-called standards and convictions found nowhere in the New Testament. And that's why Paul says this in 1 Timothy. Go to 1 Timothy. This is why Paul gives this warning in 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 1. It says in verse 7, desiring to be teachers of the law, understanding neither what they say nor whereof they affirm. But we know that the law is good if a man use it lawfully. These guys don't know the law. You know that there's a verse in Deuteronomy that these guys use to say that a woman can't wear certain clothing when the verse is about transvestites, right? You know that these stupid Christian fundamentalists say that if a woman gets married and then her husband dies, she can't get married again to another Christian. She can't get married. They said that about Dr. Ruckman. They said, Dr. Ruckman, when your wife divorced you, if you got married again, you have 2 living wives. Yeah, that's stupid. That is fundamentalist Pharisaical garbage. And how many of these fundamentalists that accuse Dr. Ruckman of that? And all of these idiots have destroyed homes and broken marriages. There was one brother about a year and a half ago. He was one of those guys. He was a well-meaning fundamentalist, this and that. Nobody had any reason to suspect the sin that he was doing. And you know what he did? He went to the hospital and he shot himself in the mouth and killed himself because they found out that he was doing a big boo-boo to one of his family members sexually. I don't want to get the video taken down. Okay. Guy was a King James, born again, dispensational, fundamentalist, Baptist, blah, 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 blah. Nobody had any idea that he was doing that behind closed doors. And then when they found out, he shot himself he killed himself in the hospital with a revolver. You understand? Yeah, you can't live that way. You can't live that way. Your identity cannot be the list of things you do that you think. You cannot earn favor with God by adding stuff that you're doing. You understand? If one woman says that she feels right with God if she doesn't use makeup, and another woman uses some natural makeup and it doesn't bother her, they're both right with God. I know that's hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, especially women, because women go after each other. They go after their throat, man. Now, is a woman not right with God if she wears a skirt under her knees? She wears it below her knee? No, of course she's right with God. Is she? So right? But a woman shouldn't wear a miniskirt. Why? Abstain from all appearance of evil. Why are you showing those legs? If a woman is showing her legs, there's a goal in mind to attract another man. Is a woman not right with God if she wears 2-inch heels? Well, brother, I just don't see that. She has to wear flats only. Okay, like really? Yeah, but a woman should know not to wear certain kinds of shoes because it looks evil. Because you know exactly the kinds of women that wear certain kinds of footwear and what it's designed to do psychologically. And women are not stupid. Women know perfectly well the kind of dressing that attracts men. Right? You understand? But some of these guys, and they love to bully women about this. Some of these guys, they're so legalistic about the way they treat their sisters in the church. And it makes me wonder if some of these guys have their own inner sexual problems that they can't control, that they feel like a woman has to cover up 100% or he's going to get in the flesh. You understand? I don't think the falling away is entirely the New Age Bible versions. I think the falling away is the Christian remnant cutting themselves off from God because they think that they're serving Him and doing the right thing when they're not. In my short time being saved, I have seen nothing. I have not lost my faith in God, but I have lost my faith in the ministry because half of these ministers, they should not be in the ministry. I'm going to be totally honest with you. Right? So I'll close it out on there. This is just an opinion I have on the falling away. You may disagree with it, but my interpretation of Galatians is most definitely the correct one. I think Ruckman was completely wrong. The falling from grace is not that. When you have false teachers, the love of money, and then you combine that with all of the fact that the King James Bible believers have the right doctrine, they have the right group, they have the right network, they have the right God, they have the right everything, and that they are still some of the worst people to deal with, that should tell you something. That was exactly the problem with the Pharisees. And there's a lot of hurting Christians right now and struggling Christians right now who have nowhere to go. And they're only participating in the church curriculum and program because they're scared of being ousted because they don't want to be by themselves. Is that from God? No, that's not from God. So then these people are looking to the internet to find an extension. They're looking for an internet to get their fill that they're missing in real life, and then the internet swallows them whole. None of these people that are on the internet were ready for the internet. That's why I approach the internet the way that I do. Because I know the internet. This was my home when I was lost. I know everything about the internet. And all these guys repeating the same mistakes. And a lot of them think I'm just some stupid kid who doesn't know anything. I know a lot more than you think I do. And I fortunately had to learn it the hard way, right? So I'll close it out on there. Pray you got a blessing from the video. Grace be to you all.